Hello, good morning, and welcome to EdgeWave's January webinar during our cybersecurity webinar series, How to Realize ROI in Your Security Investments. And today we have an exciting presentation webinar for you. I will introduce both our speakers today. Sorry about a little feedback there on the background. And before I do that, just a little bit of housekeeping. We will have all the attendees in mute. Chat will be available for questions, or actually you can post questions in the question section through the GoToWebinar feature. And I will be taking questions, we will be taking questions at the end of the presentation portion in about 30-35 minutes or so. So to kick us off, let me just talk a little bit about what we're talking about today. As part of today's webinar, we will identify kind of quickly and determine the value, right, of security and the solutions that you have today and how you're able to assess that with what you currently have deployed. You'll be able to map ROI to these security investments. And then also, we'll go through actually a business case for researching and justifying new security solutions that you're going to consider for 2018 and how you would be able to do that and tie that back into your kind of your ROI analysis. And then we will also provide you a free planning guiding checklist for vendor evaluation at the end as well before we open it up for Q&A. So now let me introduce our two presenters. We have Dawn Lewis, our Senior Marketing Manager. For those of you who attended webinars in the past, Dawn has presented before. Dawn comes with over 15 years of experience in B2B software as well as in cybersecurity. Most recently, he spent several years at ESET at the endpoint detection perspective, and brings us a vast knowledge from the product management and marketing side as well. Tony Solano, he is our network operations supervisor, but also brings to the table almost 20 years of cybersecurity experience. Some of you may have heard of Tony or seen him. He is integral to CompTIA's program around social media security and has developed a program that tied into the DoD and compliance, and has also worked extensively with Fortune 500 organizations on cybersecurity and on the network side of the house. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dawn. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Chu. So let me start by laying some assumptions on the table, which are underlying to the presentation. Every organization has different cost-benefit analysis and business needs. So as organizations decide what to spend on security, I believe that there's a lack of effective measurement to determine which investment is generating what return, but yet this information is crucial in making future spending decisions. Reasons for why this area may be lacking? I think evolving threats, they're constantly changing, so that means that there's a lack of proven reliable data, or more specifically, a lack of historical data to base your calculations on. And then as new solutions are made available from vendors, I think they also come with vendor bias that convince you to buy their solution based on their numbers. And of course, throughout all of this, I want to point out that security solutions are absolutely required. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. It's not about justifying the need for security solutions, but just helping you make the decision to choose the right one. So you will ultimately need to determine what works and doesn't work for your organization. Take all the input you need, synthesize it for your unique requirements, but the solutions you implement should be a result of your analysis and validation, not strictly someone else's. So I'd like to kick off a poll question here because IT security budgets, the budgets significantly impact the solutions you implement. So just to establish some background, I want to know how much flexibility you have. Are you getting the funds you need, or do you feel pressure to make cutbacks and consolidations? So I'm going to go ahead and open up the poll question here, and if you could take a moment to answer that for me, and then we'll share the results when we're done here. So please let me know, is your 2018 security budget anticipated to decrease, remain flat, or increase, and if so, by what percentage? We'll give it just a moment here. Okay, still collecting a few responses. Let's give it a second here. Okay, let's go ahead and close the poll. Let me share the results with everybody. Okay. Yeah, so a nice healthy mix. Looks like some folks, 15% have a decrease. 46% of you, almost half, saying you have flat budgets, and then there's some folks that are saying there's an increase in your budget. So it'd be interesting to find out the reasons why. If anybody wants to kind of share any thoughts about that or what's driving the budgets, feel free to put that in the chat window so we can maybe bring that up in part of our QA session later. So, okay, let me go ahead and close that. Okay, so let's move on. The topic is ROI, but can this financial model be applied to IT security investments? So traditional ROI measures the increased revenue from a solution compared to the cost of implementation. Mr. Bruce Schneier is the author of several books on security topics, computer security, and cryptography. He's the CTO of IBM Resilient and a fellow at Harvard's Berkman Center. And in a 2008 blog post that you can find on Schneier.com, he writes that security is about loss prevention, not about earnings. He said the term just doesn't make sense in this context. So if we shift our thinking to how does my solution or potential solution help with loss prevention, this provides a direction for building out an evaluation framework. To do this, we need to have historical data from our own organization, building a framework from, let's call it a bottoms-up approach, or at a minimum, apply data from reputable sources to come up with sort of a top-line evaluation. So let's call that the top-down approach. And so to start with the top-line approach, if you had nothing else to start with, we want to look at some data points from the Ponyman Institute, because at the end of the day, security breach usually would result in a data breach. I mean, malware can take down a server, and business continuity issues could arise, and lost productivity, and so forth. But the ultimate havoc is if there's an actual data breach as a result of a security incident. So if you hadn't previously calculated your own numbers, you could start from the top down and kind of look at this. So the Ponyman does their their yearly study at the cost of a data breach. So what I'm showing here are some stats from the 2017 report, which analyzed 419 companies across 13 different countries. And so they're saying that the average total cost of a data breach is $3.62 million. Obviously, these are large organizations, ones that you hear about that make the news. The root causes show that 47% were malicious in nature, but interestingly enough, in the U.S., it's up to 50% of the data breaches for U.S. companies were based on malicious or criminal intent. And then we look at the cost. So Ponyman says the fully loaded cost of a data breach that was reported and the average is $141 per lost or stolen record. And he also said that there's a 27.7% likelihood of a reoccurring data breach over the next 2 years. And that's a 2.1% increase from the prior year. And then, of course, the graph on the right shows that the cost actually varies based on the vertical industry. Healthcare weighing in at $380 per record, financial services $245, media at $119, research $101, and then the public sector at $71. So the Ponyman cost per records are fully loaded, and they take into account both the detection and escalation cost as well as post-breach cost. So this is a good kind of starting point if you wanted to look at what your the impact would be to you. But organizations should have their own estimates for these expense categories as part of their data breach risk and scenario planning, to be sure that they could accurately capture the financial impact in case they found themselves having to deal with a public data breach. So in creating a framework for evaluating how your solutions help with loss prevention, you should take these unplanned and unbudgeted costs and factor them in. It could be hundreds of thousands of dollars to detect and contain, and with post-breach costs, including customer support and regulatory fines, it could cost an organization millions of dollars. So now what I want to do is look at the planning models in more detail so we can calculate some numbers based on a top-down and bottom-up approach. And with that, I'm going to hand the presentation over to Tony to kind of walk us through that. And Tony, I understand you're traveling, so apologize if there's any background noise, but go ahead and.
Alrighty, can you guys hear me? We should be good. Hi, I'm Tony Solano, the head network operations nerd over here at EdgeWave. So we really want to start getting into is kind of what is this breach actually going to cost you? As Don was talking about a moment ago, talking about this top-down approach, maybe we don't necessarily have all the numbers on hand for all the things that are going on, and we kind of need to begin getting a simple way to kind of effectively evaluating this information. Generically, we would normally take a look at an annual loss expectancy. What is this actually going to cost us over the year in order to have these breaches, so that we can actually come up with a number that we can budgetarily set aside so that we can actually get some, I don't want to say get savings like we talked about with Bruce Schneider earlier. It's not revenue generating, but we're looking at loss prevention here. So we always start off with a single loss expectancy. How much are we actually going to lose in each individual occurrence? Is it a data breach? Is it going to be the loss of a record? Is it our web server downtime? Those kind of things. Secondly, we take a look at annual rate of occurrence. How often does this actually happen? If you didn't have AV software within your organization, we generically say that you have a 90% chance each year of getting a virus outbreak in your organization. So basically it is going to happen. We factor those two numbers together, and then we get our annualized loss expectancy. We know that we don't lose 100% of our asset every time something goes bad, but we do lose a piece of it. So once we have this annual loss expectancy figure, now what do we have? We kind of say that, okay, in this event, I can budget, let's say, $50K for security prevention on our systems. Now, let's kind of take this as an example. This is going to be a basic risk example. So in this example, we have a healthcare provider, and a healthcare provider has 10,000 customer records. Now, from the Ponemon Institute, it's generally a factor in that for each record that we lose in this particular vertical market, that we stand to lose $141 per record. Now, this is taking into consideration things like, the scope of the incident, what's going on, cost of forensics, and those kind of things. But as we can see here, we do that same ALE, SLE, ARO calculation. What do we have? We lose these 10,000 records at $141 a record. And then we factor in earlier how much it was going to be every 2 years, but we're factoring it in this 1 year. We have $194K loss that we're taking a look at. This is a significant loss. So what we now know is that we have basically $194K to protect against loss. Now, is that route good? No, that's probably a little bit crazy. I'm not going to say that I'm going to take $194,000 and go over there and protect a $194,000 asset. Probably not the best fiscal way of going about it, but we can at least start taking a look at kind of what we have and what we have protecting all of our stuff, our hardware, our software, the security countermeasures we've put in place, maybe the training that we've put into our end users to keep them from clicking on weird stuff like cybersecurity insurance, and also reserves to pay ransom. We've seen crypto locker and those kind of things breaking out recently. There's kind of a lot going on that we may not have actually budgeted before. So now we at least have a generic number that we can begin working with. Right? Now, we got to start figuring out, oops, go back, if there's going to be some form of a return on investment from our ALE. So what is this really going to mean? This is basically going to mean that we need to come up with an actual countermeasures that we want to put in place, and does that countermeasure going to effectively protect us? Now, when we mean effectively protect us, we're not necessarily saying that is that countermeasure going to go in there and stop everything. The thing that we know from risk management is that we can't eliminate risk. We can reduce it, right? I can reduce it to a level that all of us IT professionals, that management is willing to accept, but in doing so, is the money that I'm putting in this actually giving me some form of a value? So if we now determined that my hardware, my software, my training, my reserves, my insurance is going to cost me $95K, okay, cool. Now, $95K to protect my $194,000 asset, I now have a return on investment of 204%. Worst case scenario, it looks really good when I go in there and I present it to my management when I'm trying to get buy-off of all, of security products. The biggest thing that I've had to deal with in all my years of cybersecurity is that I want to do all this cool cybersecurity stuff, and I know that it's going to protect me. I know that it's going to protect the company, but maybe conveying this to the people that are going to cut us the checks in order to do this, this is the hard part. So now I'm coming up with mechanisms that I can use to give us a, give us a good solid figure, at least a good starting point on what we're going to get out of our savings for putting into an actual countermeasure. Now, Don was talking about a top-down approach, basically saying that, hey, we just generically need a number to begin working with. But what do these incidences really cost us? So we have to take what we refer to as more of a bottom-up approach to some of these things. So maybe how much does it really, really, really cost to have an incident? So once we actually have more information, and we can take kind of a better granular approach, we have to do a couple things. Now we start getting into real risk management stuff, but have I really fully identified all my assets that I'm protecting? Have I really fully determined the scale and scope of the incidences that are going on? Maybe loss of one record within the organization impacts us way wider than we thought to, right? Maybe that, we start having, loss of reputation and those kind of things. So once we factor in a little bit more information, now we can start getting to what we refer to as the ACI, or the actual cost of the incident. Now we got to take things into consideration like mean time to identify it. The Ponemon Institute realized that a lot of these incidences were tearing from organizations from the inside, sometimes upwards of 191 days. And then once incidences were actually realized, some of them actually took 66 days to contain or remediate. So what we really got to start factoring in, and what we have here in this slide, is that here we have something that an event happens 4 times a month, right? So we have some basic security event 4 times a month, maybe a security breach, phishing attack against email, that kind of things. And each time we have 32 hours of loss of productivity, and we're just generically going to factor in $75 an hour across a 12-month time period. What do we have? We have $115,000 actual cost of the actual incident. Now, here's the kicker. Once we start figuring in an actual bottom-up approach, now the cost of our instances actually tend to go up more often than not from an actual single loss expectancy. Sometimes they go down, but at least we have something that we can actually work with here. Now, where can we begin reducing costs? Well, what ends up happening here is my goal is now to start selecting tools that are going to help me save time with staff. I'm trying to minimize outages within the organization, right? We don't just put in one firewall, we put in 2 to make sure that, one of them goes down, everything stays operational. Reducing support calls, right? The more support calls that I have actually coming into an organization, now what do we have? We need more support staff. We have a huge outbreak where we lose all of our customer records. Now I got to field more support people in order to handle that. Now, this is kind of a slippery slope here, because once you start factoring in training, and you train all your people that here's a new tool that we can use to begin reducing our cyber impact, what happens is now everyone knows that email's malicious, this type of thing, and they begin reporting more and more and more. But over time, now we've identified key metrics where we can go ahead and say, hey, we're saving money because this product enabled us to do X, Y, Z. Now, guaranteeing and maintaining SLAs. Right? If I have a client, we're providing a service and I can maintain that SLA, right? And I don't have service outages, well, what am I doing? I'm reducing my costs. I'm overall reducing downtime. Now, where do we get this ROI from, right? We want ROI from loss prevention. So we've come in and we've determined the actual cost of the incident. Now we want to go ahead and figure out if there's some kind of savings. Now, this is where we actually get the information that we need for how much can we actually spend on prevention. So what we're coming up here is I'm going to estimate my percentage reduction in MTTR, which is mean time to remediate, that my applied technology delivered. Now, my annual cost of the incidents times my reduced time to resolution is going to equal my annual savings. So what I have here is, instead of having that $115,000 incident, what I've done is I've hopefully reduced the incident, the overall impact of the incident by 50%. Now I got a 57,000 savings on the incident. Now what do I really have? Now I can generically go in and say, okay, in order for me to hopefully prevent a $115,000 outage, right? Now we can start factoring in up to $57,000 in order to protect it. So now I can begin evaluating products. I can go ahead and say, hey, this product, based off of what it does, how we're going to use it to lower the actual scale and scope of the impact of an incident or a data breach, whatever it is. Once we can narrow down that window that it takes to actually fix something or prevent as much of it as possible, now we kind of begin having a direct savings. When I can report an actual good ROI to my management, I can get new products, I can get the funding to do this stuff. If I can't come up with these numbers, they're just going to look at me and say, so you want to protect a $50,000 asset with a $100,000 firewall? No, not going to happen. But if I can walk up to them and say, I want to protect a $50,000 asset with $5,000 of prevention or protection, you know what? I'm probably going to get that from my management. All right, Don, I'll turn this back over to you so you can get a new poll to see how you're getting C-level buy-off from all of this.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. Appreciate that. Appreciate being able to take the call when you're en route between our facilities to help add that kind of real-world experience, some of the things that you've had to present for your previous employers and so forth. So wanted to find out, so if you do have to build a business case, want to ask this poll question, let me go ahead and launch that right now. And interested in everyone's feedback. Okay, so we want to know, how difficult is it to socialize the need for new security solutions within your organization and to obtain the C-level approval? So everyone can take a moment to vote, and then we'll share the results in just a moment. So is it very difficult, somewhat difficult, depends on the solution, or it's not very difficult? Just give it another second here. Okay. All right, let me go ahead and close the polling, and we will share the results. Okay, so interestingly enough, 33% said it's very difficult to get the C-level buy-off and socialization within your organization, and then 58% said it depends on the solution. So that's actually a good segue, because we want to move into the last portion of this presentation and basically talk about building a business case. So, you know, obviously when you're building a business case, you have to be able to articulate, you know, the parameters involved. And so let's use the example of social engineering attacks that result in, you know, spear phishing emails, spear phishing attacks. So to walk through this, you would say, well, okay, what is the problem we're trying to solve? So let's say John, the IT guy that Tony had brought out in the example, he says, okay, we're trying to minimize the effects that spear phishing email attacks have on my organization. Okay, so what is the gap that we're trying to close? Well, current email security solutions can't predict and always protect against targeted attacks that are designed to be one-to-one, which usually evade the gateway spam filters. and we're concerned about failing an audit or worse, an actual data breach. Well, why is it coming up now? The timing, what's driving it at this time? So John says, okay, we get at least one spear phishing attack each week because they evade the existing filters at the gateway, and even our endpoint security can't predict human behavior to stop an employee who isn't sure about the email but doesn't believe they have a quick option to validate the email's legitimacy. These emails usually target our C-level and financial staff, and if discovered and reported, it creates a lot of work for IT to resolve at the expense of other tasks. So what is the organizational impact? Well, not only does it create more work for IT, successful spear phishing attacks could lead to a data breach, costing our organization lots of money and even affect our future viability. So then, of course, you would walk through recommended solutions, how are these derived and evaluated, how many solutions were considered in the process, what are the projections and outcomes if the solution's implemented, is this going to close the gap? And then how will we track progress and how often? So just making it relevant to what EdgeWave does. So you may have heard we launched a new solution called ThreatTest. So I wanted to apply that to this John, the IT guy scenario about the phishing problem. So EdgeWave ThreatTest is an automated phishing email incident response service that empowers employees to report suspicious emails directly to EdgeWave's hybrid detection center from their inbox with the click of a button. So it delivers real-time threat investigation and response using a combination of machine learning and live security analysts who reply to the end user within minutes. So we believe this reduces the uncertainty for the end user, enforces their security awareness training, and it frees up IT resources from having to directly manage the investigation and remediation. So going back to our business case to fill in the remaining blanks, what is the recommended solution? Well, ThreatTest is a point solution that empowers end users to participate in the company's security posture. It complements existing gateway email security solutions and endpoint security because John says we didn't find that this level of service existed beforehand. The projections and outcomes, if this would be implemented, is this going to plug the gap? So John, in his business case, would say yes, because it delivers a customized and multi-layered approach that isn't currently part of any existing solution, and it delivers a much quicker response than our own internal efforts could do. And then lastly, how would we track progress and how often? So John would write in his business case, we can use ThreatTest, the central alerts and reports to identify trends. It will give the IT department information as to the increased awareness by employees, help me see the real impact that phishing has on my organization and how it helps decrease the IT overhead that I'd have to otherwise spend. So if you had a phishing problem and evaluated ThreatTest, what would the potential savings be for your organization? How improved would your security posture be, and what efficiencies would you gain? Would you see reduced IT overhead, but still have increased visibility into the problem? Would you see a reduction in phishing dwell time because with this solution, the message is removed from the inbox and quarantined to make sure that the employees don't click on it? Would it also save you time because it reduces the volume of help desk tickets? That's interesting because some of our customers that have deployed this already actually said, hey, we were spending hours a week answering employees that were saying they had security awareness training, a rolled out formal program, and they were basically saying, is this email safe? Is this email safe? So they were forwarding the emails to the IT team. So they had to spend several hours looking at the email, taking it to a computer off the network to actually evaluate it and see if it was malicious or not. So that caused them a bunch of overhead. So they implemented ThreatTest, and it helped reduce their overall volume of help desk tickets. And then, of course, quicker response to end users and helps enforce the security awareness training. So there is a savings potential, and this is just an example of if you're building a business case for something new, how you're tying it back to some sort of hard numbers so you can present a data-driven recommendation to your C-level staff. Lastly, if you're evaluating, if you're doing a business case, and if you're evaluating something where there are multiple solutions out there, multiple vendors to consider, you'd want to have a framework to make sure you're doing apples to apples. And so this is part of at the end of the presentation, there'll be a link to download kind of a vendor evaluation checklist. So as you're going through an evaluation model and you're looking at the vendors, you want to score them, put them in a kind of equal playing field to say, what's the vendor stability, size, years in business, clients, what their roadmap looks like, the product stability, technology considerations, is it extensible, is it compatible, things like that. Your general impressions of, dealing with the staff, are they easy to work with, time frame for deployment, how quickly is it, and how easy is it to set up and deploy across your organization. Of course, you're looking at licensing cost. A lot of folks will look at it just pure based on licensing, but usually there's other determining factors that help a company decide, hey, which vendor they're going to choose. It's not just based on cost, but not just the cost of the licensing, but the training and support, the data migration. There's a bunch of things that go in there. And then, of course, training and support, what's their availability, their support coverage hours, what's the depth of their online help resources, documentation, and so forth. So these are just some things you would look at as you're evaluating that. And so the vendor eval checklist is the link that's shown on the screen, edgewave.com/ROI. Again, it's a simple Excel sheet where you could kind of follow some of the categories for evaluating vendors, and you can score them, and the highest score would help you drive a decision of which vendor you might want to go with on something that's where there's a lot of options. This ThreatTest product that I mentioned is something that's new, and we don't believe there's anything out there like that today that uses a hybrid approach, and it complements other existing measures. And so you can learn more about ThreatTest at edgewave.com/products/ThreatTest. And then wanted to announce in February, we're going to have our next webinar, a little more deep dive, a customer case study with actual numbers of saying how much they've saved by implementing ThreatTest, how it's helped them close the phishing attack gap. So with that, I'll turn it back to Chu, and we can kind of go through and see what kind of questions we have.
Thanks, Don and Tony. Now we've opened it up to our Q&A sessions. I'm sure you guys have a lot of questions about how it was calculated and the benefits and access to information. I typically get a question around, will this be recorded and provided to the attendees? And yes, it is recorded, and you should get this sent to you directly as an attendee. And we're opening up for questions right now, and let me just see what questions we are getting in at the moment. Just a reminder to submit a question. There is a question feature on the dashboard over here, and you can just submit the questions directly, and they will pop in, and then we'll be able to discuss those as they come in. So one of the questions that we have is, can you, Don, or maybe Tony, kind of go back through, the ROI process a little bit on the ACI, and just explain that just one more time so that people understand kind of how the formula works through in the calculation. So Don, do you want to do that, or Don? Let's do Don. Don, do you want to take that one?
Yeah. So you're looking at and these are general numbers that you can kind of get this information online, but ultimately you're determining what's for you specifically. You want to determine, the bottoms-up approach is your actual annual, your cost of incidents. You need to know based on your data, whether it's your security logs, your number of help desk tickets, you're piecing all that together and looking at the time it takes to resolve these incidents. And basically you want to determine, come up with some numbers of how long it takes to contain it. You're looking at, the cost involved at an hourly rate. So in the case that Tony had mentioned with our fictitious customer, John, the IT guy, he was reporting 4 security incidents a month, whether it's you know, a virus that took down a server, whether it's a phishing attack. So we had 4 of those, and we were estimating two IT staff having to spend 2 business days, so maybe you know, 8-hour days times 2 folks. So you got 32 hours total involved to resolve that, whatever that incident was, and an hourly rate of $75 an hour. If that happened every month, you multiply all that out, and so in our scenario, the ACI, annual cost of incidents, for John, the IT guy, was $115,000. And that, again, is the most accurate way to determine, because that's your real baseline. I mean, you can start with the top-down approach, looking at the Ponyman numbers that I presented earlier, and say, here's the what-if scenario if you believe those numbers based on what Ponyman's Institute is reporting. But again, it's more of where can I make a measurable impact, and you start with your own numbers. If you have the data, if you're not collecting it, you should start collecting it. Find a better way to roll that up, and then you have a roadmap for saying, here's where I'm going to find, how I'm going to find those efficiencies that Tony had mentioned. Things like how can I, you know, minimize or avoid outages, reduce support calls, reducing my time to fix, things like that. And then that's from that you would be able to go out and find what kind of solutions can I implement that would help me, you know, improve those metrics to ultimately lower my ACI.
Thanks, Don. We have another question too. Is if I have further questions or there are any other consultative needs, is that something EdgeWave provides? I'll answer this one.
Oh, okay.
Which is we don't have a professional services group that would provide this level of analysis. However, if someone wanted further information about this in the process, we're happy to follow up with them, and Don or Tony can just briefly sit with them and walk through it to understand, you know, the value of kind of this vendor selection process, as well as the ROI calculation. So that's not a problem at all. So the best thing was you could email Don at dlewis@edgewave.com. Oh, I just gave Don's email out to everyone. So keep that to yourself.
No spam messages.
Yeah, no spam messages. You know, that would be helpful, because I think it's a lot to, I think, it'll absorb in a 30-minute presentation. So so there may be follow-up questions once you guys get an opportunity to kind of look and introspectively into your own network environment and figure out, you know, if there's a need or additional questions. Let me see if there's another question that came in. Pricing on ThreatTest, is there pricing available? We do. We have pricing. It starts actually as an introductory pricing right now that starts at about $1 per mailbox per month, and then obviously it tiers from that depending on term and volume. So hopefully that helps in terms of that level of consideration if someone is looking for an anti-phishing solution that would really empower the end users to be able to, you know, submit those emails and remove the guesswork and ultimately lower the help desk and IT support around that.
Yeah, well, and I think the customer that we have with the case study on that I mentioned, he said that because he was able to track the number of increased support tickets and calls from his employees asking about the phishing emails, he was able to calculate his cost that the spear phishing problem was for his company.
Right.
And so he was able to justify this additive solution because no other current solutions can ultimately protect and provide this custom level of service on demand that I presented. So, you know, that small cost was less than the actual cost he was dealing with. So he was able to quickly and easily show, you know, the ROI and the savings when he put together a business case kind of like that.
Yep, great, thank you. All right, I don't see any other questions come in at this time. So if there's nothing else coming in, we will conclude our webinar today. Please feel free to check out our webinar for February, and it'll be an impactful, groundbreaking, earth-shattering case study webinar that I'm sure you will enjoy attending. So we look forward to seeing you guys next time. Thank you.